Up, up, up. Welcome to Vintage Garage. Glad you're here. We have another full show today. First, we'll introduce our Titan Mk9 Formula Ford. That's the car that we'll be restoring next season on Vintage Garage. After that, we'll pull the motor in the car, and then we'll spend the rest of the show stripping the car down to its bare frame. Next season, we'll paint the frame, build a race motor for the car, and reassemble the car, restoring the parts as we go. So let's get started. We have a full show today. Glad you're here. This car is a Titan Mk9 Formula Ford. It's one of our favorite cars, and this is the car that we're going to be restoring next year on Vintage Garage. In the spring of 2000, we received an email with an attached photo of a basket case 1975 Titan Mk9 for sale in Florida. Over the 3-day Memorial Day weekend, we drove to Miami, loaded the parts into the back of the A-van, and brought the car home. We unloaded the parts, spread them out on the pad in front of Vintage Garage, and inventoried them. Besides missing the engine body and gearbox, the car came with Mark 6 rear suspension instead of Mk9. On the plus side, the frame was in very good shape, the original battery tray and fuel cell were included, both radiators were there, the steering wheel was very nice, and the front suspension was complete. We were pleased with the deal. We brought the chassis into the shop, set it up on sawhorses, and began the pre-assembly of the car. We discovered that the steering column was missing, so we fabricated one the first day. We set a goal of taking the car to the Titan reunion race planned for Gingerman Raceway in Michigan at the beginning of July. By the middle of June, we had the car rolling and steering, although all of the suspension parts in the rear were Titan Mk6 rather than Titan Mk9. We loaded up both our Titans and headed to Gingerman. We arrived safely at Gingerman and unloaded the cars. We parked the Mk9 under our canopy and spread out all our parts for the flea market. On the first day of the event, we met Charles Lucas, founder of Titan, Pierre Phillips, the American West Coast distributor of Titan cars in the 70s, and Roy Thomas, designer of the cars. Andy Antipus was there with his Titan Mk9, and we took this photo of his car on the false grid. We took many close-up photos of Andy's car to help us figure out what was missing from our Mk9 and also to determine what was original on our car and what wasn't. Late in the day on Friday, the Titans lined up for a group photo. Andy's Mk9 was the only Mk9 running at the event. Most of the cars were Mk6s. Throughout the weekend, Roy Thomas, designer of the cars, provided setup tips to the crews. Here he is recommending spring rates to Andy and Todd Strong. These tips were priceless. By Saturday afternoon, we had traded our Mk6 rear suspension for a nearly complete Mk9 rear suspension and our Mk6 body parts for a nearly complete set of Mk9 bodywork. All we were missing for the suspension was the left rear Mk9 lower A-arm. All we were missing for the body was the nose. We also picked up a seat for the car. The All-Titan feature race was run in the rain and was won by Todd Strong, driving Andy's Mk9. It was great to see the lone Mk9 beat the dozen or so Mk6s. As soon as we returned back to the shop, we fabricated the missing Mark 9 left rear lower A-arm by constructing a mirror image of the Mark 9 right rear lower A-arm that we got at Gingerman. That completed the suspension for the car. The Titan Mark 9 was the last Formula Ford design produced by Titan, and as such represents the pinnacle of the vintage era in Formula Ford. We found this side photo of the Titan Mark 9 factory car in the Titan Registry archives, and think we'll likely paint ours with the same scheme. In 1974, factory driver Derek Lawrence brought a new orange and white Titan Mark 9 to America, and immediately dominated events throughout the Northeast. The last archive photo we have is of a Titan Mark 9 painted in the colors of Fred Opert Racing. Fred was the American East Coast Titan distributor and was the sponsor of our Titan Mark 6 when the car was driven new by Armando Knotts. It's an alternative paint scheme we think looks nice. Today we need to strip down the car so that we can take all of the suspension links and everything that needs to be nickel plated to the nickel plating shop. The first thing we need to do is take the body off the car. So let's do that now. We were unable to trade for a nose section, so we had to buy this brand new. Fortunately, Andy Antipas of the Titan Registry had a nose mold, and he was able to get us a brand new nose made. Titan Mark 9s came in two varieties. They had one variety that had a one-piece cockpit surround, where the nose was part of the cockpit, and then they had some cars that had removable noses. We're going to configure this car with a removable nose. That piece that we took off is going to be the nose section, and this little piece here we're going to have to splice on to the main cockpit surround so that we can mount the Zeus fastener holders in this section. You can see this little cutout here where the brake hose to the front right wheel will go, and there's a similar one in the main cockpit surround. We're going to have to put these two pieces together so that those line up. That'll take a little bit of body work, and we'll do all that next season on the show. The main cockpit surround comes off easily, and we'll mount Zeus fasteners on that too to hold it on the car. We traded a Mark 6 snorkel for a Mark 9 snorkel, and we just have it sitting on the car. It'll be bolted to the tail section when we restore the car. Likewise, the tail of the body is just sitting on the car. We'll have to come up with an arrangement to mount it firmly. To take off the underbody of the car, we're going to need to jack the car up. So right now it's going to be a pretty good time to change the flat on the left rear of the car. We jack these up by just putting a jack under the back of the Hewland. The car is light enough so it really doesn't hurt anything. We'll pull the car over this way a little bit too so we can have more room to work on the tire. This is the flat tire. Normally the Formula Fords and most racing cars don't use inner tubes in their tires, and the tires leak down pretty quickly. It's a real nuisance in the shop when you're working on a car because its tires are always flat. We usually put tubes in the tires of the cars we're restoring so that we don't have to pump up the tires every couple of days. We did that with this car. This rear tire has a tube in it, but it's leaking. Once we get this flat fixed, the next thing we'll do is pull the motor and transmission out of the car, and it'll be a lot easier to do that if we can roll the car around. So let's fix the flat now. It won't take very long. Now we'll go over to the tire machine and fix the flat. The first step to fixing the flat is to remove the valve from the inner tube. We use the bead breaker that's on the machine to break the bead on the tire. It's been on there a while. Use a little bit of soapy water to lubricate the wheel where we need to take the tire off. Okay, we don't need to take the wheel completely off the tire. We just want to get the inner tube out. It has a lot of patches on it. We're not going to bother with patching it anymore. We're going to put a new inner tube in it. We'll hold the tire up while we carefully feed the tube in. Being careful not to pinch it or cut it. We screw this tool on the end of the valve stem so that it doesn't fall back into the tire and we're going to lose it. Since we're not interested in how well a car is going to handle, but simply that it rolls around in the shop easily, we're going to run the tire pressure up to about 30 pounds so it's nice and hard. Now we'll mount the tire back on the Titan Mk9. It's going to make it a lot easier to pull the motor if the car rolls nicely. Next we want to take the side panels off the body. These Zeus fasteners are just sitting here in order to get to the motor mounts. We can take the radiator out. It's in real good shape. And we'll set that aside. And we'll go around to the other side. And with the radiator out, we can remove this side cover. And we'll set that aside. It's going to take a lot of body work to make that look nice. Now we'll let the car down and hopefully it'll roll around easily. And it does. It rolls nicely now. The Titan Mk9 is sitting in one of two bays at Vintage Garage that we use to pull motors. We put a hook in the ceiling and reinforced the ceiling over this bay so that it's strong enough to lift motors. We had an expensive engine hoist and we gave it away. The legs on it were a real nuisance. They were always fouling in the cars because they're low anyways. It's a simple arrangement, but one that we prefer. We simply hook a cable pull into the screw eye in the ceiling, and then we run the cable pull down and it's right over the motor. All we do is lift the motor and push the car out from underneath it. We use a chain and a couple of head bolts to pull the motor. We'll pull the Hewland gearbox at the same time. We put a bolt in the middle here so that the cable pull doesn't slip backwards and forwards. This arrangement is strong enough so we can pull the whole car up using a cable pull. We'll get it centered over the hook in the ceiling first by just lifting up the whole car. Now we'll unbolt the motor and all the mounts. We have to take off this transmission mount. We have to take off the motor mounts down here and a number of other things. We'll just get started on it. The gear shift linkage passes through the frame here and goes back to the gearbox. This is one of the pieces that we're going to get nickel plated, and we're also going to plate this part. These cars are designed so the motor's real easy to take out. There's two 3/8 bolts here that hold on the transmission mount, two on the other side, and a motor mount on each side. The motor mounts are bolted to the chassis with a single 1/2-inch bolt on each side. Now all we need to do is jack up the back of the transmission to hold the power unit level, and we'll be all set. And we're done. Now all we need to do is roll the chassis forward and then lower the motor and transmission as a unit onto one of our engine roller stands. We'll temporarily put a bolt in the top link and fix it to the chassis so that it keeps the wheel straight while we roll it around. We've done the same thing on the other side. Now we simply roll the car forward and out from under the engine and gearbox. We'll roll the Titan Mk9 over to our assembly bay, the same bay that we used for the restoration of the Royale RP2. We use a little engine cart from NMW Products from Raritan, New Jersey. We put a junk oil pan into the cart just to provide support for the motor, and then we just lower the motor down onto it. Next season on Vintage Garage, we'll turn this junk stock motor into a Formula Ford race motor. We've now moved the Titan Mk9 over to the assembly bay at Vintage Garage, and it's time to take it apart and strip down the suspension so that we can take it to the nickel plating shop this week. We also need to take off this under tray. We'll be fixing it and painting it next season on Vintage Garage, along with the rest of the bodywork. So let's get started. First step is we need to jack up the car. We'll lift up the car really high first so that we can get the under tray off the body and out from under the car. We'll just pull the under tray back and out. While we were taking the under tray out, we just found this nice bonus we didn't realize that we had. This is the gear shift lever. We thought we were going to have to make one. It's missing the knob, but it's a whole lot easier to make a knob than it is to make the gear shift lever. This goes right here and is a wonderful addition to the car. That makes our day. We'll also take the seat out. We got this from Andy Antipus. It's wonderful. He also gave us this padding for it, which is most appreciated. This is the original fuel cell that came with the car. It says Marston, Wolverhampton, England. It's also interesting, it's got a manufacture date of May 74. We may try to reuse that. We'll refoam it and put it in an aluminum can. We also have a real nice Charles Lucas cap for the filler neck on the fuel cell. It's really nice. We'll polish that up. It's aluminum. We'll set that aside for now. We may be able to reuse the firewall. We're not quite sure what that hole is for. We'll figure that out. This hole is necessary. That's where the fuel line passes through to the motor. Now we can let the chassis down. We're going to put wood blocks under the back of it to hold it off the ground. We'll do the same at the front of the car. We'll jack it up and we'll put a big stack of wood blocks under the front of it so that we can take the suspension off without the chassis falling down on the ground. We're at the right rear corner of the car now, and we're going to start the disassembly of the rear suspension. We have this little ice cream tub that we're going to put all the nuts and bolts in, and we have this cardboard box back here. We're going to put all the suspension links in there that need to be nickel plated. So let's get started. We need to remove the rod ends from the top links. This is one of the parts we had to make for the car. We made it out of a straight piece of thick wall chrome moly tubing. We threaded the inside. We welded a nut on this end so that we can use a wrench to turn it when we're adjusting the camber of the car. So we'll put that in the box. We made a pair of these triangular shaped steel plates for both sides of the car. They were missing when we got the car, and we're going to get them nickel plated. We'll take off the upper trailing link. This part is hard to get, and to make it look nice, we want to nickel plate this end. But in order to have it still fit, we can't nickel plate this. So we'll have to put some tape over that before we give it to the nickel plater. And we'll put the trailing links in the box. Now we can take the wheel and upright completely off the car, and we'll set that aside.
And we need to take the rod end out of that part. And we'll put that in the box and get that plated. Lastly, we'll take the shock off. The spring isn't under tension, so we can just loosen the adjuster enough to get the cap off. We're not going to plate the shock absorber. It's too difficult to take it all apart to plate those parts. So we'll end up painting that probably. So we'll set that aside. But the coil spring we want a nickel plate, so we'll put that in the box. That finishes the disassembly of the right rear of the car. The left rear is exactly the same. We'll go around and do that now. And that finishes up the left rear of the car. Now we'll move up to the front of the car and start work on the front right suspension. There's a lot of nuts and bolts right behind the wheel, and it's a lot easier to take off the suspension if we take the wheel off first. We'll just set that off to the side. There's nothing on this part that we're going to nickel plate, but we need to take off the lower A-arm, the upper control arm, the leading link, the front anti-roll bar, all these down links. I have to take off this top link next. There's a circlip in the end of that link that holds a spherical rod bearing in here. Before we send this to nickel platers, we're going to have to take out that circlip and that bearing. That's the little clip that holds the bearing in. So now this piece is ready to be nickel plated. We'll put it in the box. It's a delicate part, but we'll put that in the box to be nickel plated. This little downlink for the anti-roll bar is real neat. We think that's a factory part. The original plating on that was probably cadmium, but we'll take that and get that nickel plated. That's a real nice little piece, probably pretty rare. It's actually not a tube with nuts welded on the end, that's a single piece. Be hard to find. Next we'll take off the front shock. This piece is aluminum and we don't want to plate that. We'll just polish that up. And there's nothing on the shock that we can plate. But this spring we want to plate, so we'll put that in the box. It's a very clever design. There's also a spherical rod end in this end with another circlip. Okay, this piece is all stripped down now. It's ready to go to the nickel plater. We'll put that in the box. And that finishes the disassembly of the front suspension. We still have the front anti-roll bar, but we can't take it off till we finish the other side of the car. So we'll go around now and do the left front of the car in exactly the same fashion as we did the right front. We finished taking the suspension off the car. Now we need to remove the steering rack, the steering column, and everything associated with the steering. There's a number of parts in there that we're going to have to get nickel plated. The hub and the wheel is all aluminum, so we don't need to nickel plate that. We'll polish that up. The steering column is simply a piece of straight chrome moly tube. It's never been nickel plated, so it's just raw steel. Now we need to nickel plate that. That'll show. We have to have that looking nice. There's also a piece right down here in the steering U-joint that would look good to be nickel plated. So let's take that off now. There's 2 aluminum pieces that hold on the anti-roll bar. We've almost finished stripping down the chassis. There's only a few parts left to go. We need to remove the clutch pedal, the brake pedal, the accelerator pedal. We also have 2 pieces of shift linkage over here that need to be nickel plated. So we need to get them off before we forget them. We removed the 3 master cylinders. There's 2 for the brake and 1 for the clutch. There's 2 brake cylinders so that you can adjust the bias front to rear. They look to be in pretty good shape. We'll rebuild those and reuse them. We also removed all of the pedals and the arms for the pedals. This is the clutch pedal, and this little pad is where the driver's foot pushes on the pedal. This is the brake pedal. A bearing goes in this hole and the balance beam goes through there to adjust the brakes. And this is the accelerator pedal. It's 1 piece and the pad is right on the arm of the pedal. We also have this little clevis that's part of the clutch pedal. So we need to get all of those nickel plated. So we'll put those parts in the box. We finished stripping down the chassis of the Titan Mk9 and we can see that it needs a little bit of repairs and it needs general cleanup before it's ready to paint. We'll do all that next season on Vintage Garage. It's pretty surprising how much air there is in a car. When you get right down to it, it's just a chassis, little box of parts, and an ice cream tub full of bolts. That's it for this week at Vintage Garage. We had a great time. Glad you're here. We had a busy day and we made good progress on the Titan Mk9 Formula Ford. Next week is our last show of the season on Vintage Garage. First off, we'll illustrate the technique of gas welding using a jet flux system. We need to finish the construction of the shift linkage for the Titan Mk9 before we get it nickel plated. After that, we'll report on the results of our test of JB Weld. Then we'll devote the rest of the show to a segment we call the Making of Vintage Garage. We'll take you behind the scenes at Vintage Garage, showing you how we make the TV show every week. We'll also have a batch of outtakes from this season. So until next week, thanks for coming. Glad you were here. Keep the shiny side up. We'll see you in a week. If you'd like more information about any of the projects we've worked on today, please visit our website at www.vintagegarage.com. There's a link to our email address on the website. Please email us. We'd like to hear from you. Till next time, keep the shiny side up. Thanks for coming. See you next week.